Welcome into the Get Invested podcast, a podcast about all things real estate and real estate investing, brought to you by Capital Velocity Investments and a part of the Matthias Talks Investing Substack. Hello, welcome back to the Get Invested podcast. We're happy that you are here with us. This is part 2 of an episode digging into all the things that one could/should at least think about asking a sponsor when you are researching an investment. We are kind of continuing on in that conversation now. Just a few notes. No, Matthias and I are not just wearing the same thing that we were wearing last week. Actually, we have just like jumped in time and recorded this and dropped it and then jumped back in time. So we're actually, yes, it's the same outfits, but not just because we just kept them on for all this time. At this point, it's second weekend of the tournament, so hopefully, the heels of taking care of San Diego State and then beat a mighty SEC team, Ole Miss. And then after that, I don't even remember who the 3 seed is. It's going to be a tough sledding after that. I don't even remember, but maybe they're riding high. It's happened before, Matthias. UCLA came out of the first 4 and went all the way to the Final 4. So first to final.
Yep.
That's the slogan.
It's happened.
It has happened. Matthias and KU. See, I got Arkansas and then St. John's. So,
yep, potentially.
Got to go through Calipari and then Patino, possibly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to assume that we're both just sitting pretty in the second weekend. Put those vibes out there.
Sure.
Clearly, I've gotten a lot done on the moving since the last time we podded. Actually, that's not entirely true. Between recordings, my wife did carry out some more clothes. But other than that, yeah, since the last time we did this, aka 10 minutes ago, not a lot has happened. All right. So let's get in on the other side of this. Now, we have crossed over. I mean, it's inevitable when you're asking questions that you're going to have questions and they're going to have answers that are going to cross all the different kind of facets of a vetting situation, whether that be, you're asking a sponsor thing and he answers a thing about the business plan, or you ask a business plan thing and something about him comes up or her comes up, or you ask about the business plan and they're speaking to the property. Sure. But now we're going to kind of take a more hopefully kind of focused approach to thinking through not just the property, but the sponsor's vetting of the property and making sure that all those, I's have been crossed and T's have been dotted. So, yeah, that's how we do it down here in North Carolina. All right, so we're back to me just asking the questions Matthias is going to answer. We're talking about Vieira now. Most of the questions I'm planning on asking, there's not really anything on this investment summary that would be that. This would just be more background. Matthias, do you think there's any... Do you still want to pull it up for anything in particular?
I don't think we need it for now. We can reference it if we need to, but no, I mean, I think we're probably good to just go.
Yeah. Now, in a podcast, and I think perhaps a Substack letter, I don't know. Have you ever written about due diligence in a newsletter?
A little bit. I think I have.
A little bit, but I don't think we did a nice breakdown, I thought.
We did.
One that I keep falling back on in the podcast.
It was I don't know.
Yeah, the buckets of due diligence, right? The ones you have to be doing as a sponsor, and kind of all the ways in which you have to have all these, I don't know if you want to call them spinning plates in the air, or, all these different rail cars moving forward, and they're going to eventually merge and interweave. And
sure.
But there's 4 main things there's 5 total, but one of those is investors, and that's from Matthias as a sponsor's perspective. The 4 that an investor would want to think about, the 4 categories that they want to think about if they wanted to ask a sponsor questions about them, are the lender, the insurance, the property management, and the inspection are the kind of 4 main buckets, if you will. Now, of course, these are all going to be intertwined in a lot of different ways, right? Like the lender's going to look at the insurance, and the insurance going to, and the property management is going to be a part of what they find on inspection. And yes, all of those things are going to come together. And some of this our listeners will be familiar with, because you got to get an inspection, you got to get a loan, and you got to get insurance when you are buying a residential property as well. Although all of these are a little bit more straightforward in those circumstances. So, I guess I'll just start at the first one I listed here, which is, what can you tell? What's the partnership with the lender that we're going with in this investment in Viera, and why were they the ones to go with? Like, what was it about the deal that you liked?
So we actually bounced around a lot on the lenders, because it was when we locked this, it was back in there were jittery rates there too. So what we look for, I'll kind of answer that in a general way. Like, basically what we're looking for when we bring loans, we want to bring, it's when a property this size, it's always going to be a big company. Like, very unlikely that anything would ever happen to that company and to where, but they're lending us the money anyways. If a company went under while we owed them money, it would be like, sorry. That's like, yeah. I mean, theoretically, they could call the loan due, which would be a real problem. We'd have to refinance or whatever. But basically, you want to look at your rate, you want to look at your terms, and you want to look at your loan to value. So, how much leverage do you want? How much is required to make the property to get the kind of returns that you want? As a beginner investor, as an experienced investor, you don't much care who the actual lender is. You care maybe if it's a Fannie Mae loan or if it's just a portfolio loan from a big company. In this case, we ended up going something very similar to this, but I think we actually changed from the quote that we had, because we got a better quote from somebody else that we liked a little bit more. So basically, you look at, hey, are you getting interest only on this? On a value add project, interest only is pretty cool because it gives you more cash flow in the first few years to that you can use to improve the property and add that value. So it keeps your cash flow. But then again, on the other side, if you weren't adding any value and you just were buying cash flow, now you're not amortizing any of the cost. Like, if the value of the property is not going to go up, well, then you got to refinance. You got to somehow come up with a huge down payment whenever you do refinance, because you didn't knock off you didn't add value on top of the loan. So you're going to have to, whatever leverage they're going to give you, it's potentially risky if you're not adding value and increasing the value of the property. So that's something to be aware of in the loan, for sure. And these are questions you would ask the sponsors, like, hey, are we doing interest only for the whole time, or whatever? And they should have a term sheets a lot like this one from Viera that'll kind of answer those questions. Did I answer your question like you were asking?
Yeah. So first of all, I know I just said that there's going to be no reason for us to pull up the pitch deck, and then on the first question, I immediately pulled it up because I was like, well, let's have something about the financing. I feel like, having done a few of these now myself, as CVI Georgetown, not prospective investor, there's different ways to do this, but they're almost all pitch decks should have something that looks at least like this, if not something a little bit more detailed. But the thing that I guess I, as an investor, want to know, if I didn't know, if I had an experience in looking at these, is this loan to leverage like high or low, or should I be concerned? Like, it seems like it's pretty reasonable. It's like 60-40 almost, 63-37. That seems good. But what if I walk in and they're going to say the loan to leverage is 85 or 90? Should I run away immediately, or should I just ask them to explain why it's going to be that, rather than a lower one that I've seen before?
Yeah. So there's no hard, fast rule that you should use. It kind of depends on the business plan and what the plan is for the property. So if you're adding value, it's okay to do a higher leverage because you're building in leverage by increasing the value. You know what I mean? Or you're reducing the leverage by increasing the value of the property. But in a cash flow play, you don't necessarily want to go high leverage because you're not counting on a bunch of appreciation to add, over time. You want to keep that loan to value low initially, because you're not going to build into it with a huge increase of income. So it'll depend on the play. You typically 70% and below is relatively low leverage, meaning you basically bring in 30% down payment. Think of it as a 30% down payment on the house that you're buying, except 30% down payment on the investment you're buying. So that's relatively, like, 63 is real low. Now, what that typically means is that you have to bring a lot more cash, so that it just makes it harder to acquire. You have to bring in more investors, but the upside is that it's very low risk, right? So, if you're bringing 40% down payment, then your payment is going to be significantly lower than if you were bringing only 25% down payment. right? So that gives you a lot of margin for error on your income, even if you don't start increasing the value of the property and increasing your income. So it's safety factor, and you just look at how much are we investing, how big is the investment. In this case, we raised $21 million, so we were going to be pretty sure that we're not leveraging to the hilt with $21 million. That is a uncomfortable position to be in, obviously. We wanted to keep it low leverage for that reason, and the fact that the deal is good enough, the value will increase enough that we'll get even better leverage. I mean, even lower loan to value leverage as we increase the value. But going in to where we're gaining control of the property, it's just lowering the risk.
To have more down payment, right?
Correct.
You give yourself more margin for error. Yeah, exactly. Okay. The down payment is only 14.43 in these numbers, but you raise 21 because the rest of that is capex, reserves, stuff like that, right? So people
Exactly.
and then you got to think about that as, I mean, if I'm thinking this as investors, like, oh, well, that means we're not going to have to raise more funds or borrow more money because we've already saved up all the money to execute all the things we want to execute.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily just how much you pay the bank for the loan, but how much you have to execute the vision as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, is this an agency loan or a bridge loan?
This is so it's kind of neither.
Okay.
So there's agency to Fannie Mae, Freddie. We were looking at a Fannie option for this when we were buying it, but there's just like New York Life or somebody MetLife will do loans like on commercial properties all the time, and they don't necessarily subscribe to the federally. They don't have to be. They could achieve the same or even better terms at times, but they don't. They're just not agency per. Think that.
Okay.
I think of agency as federally backed. This is a big institutional funds, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a Fannie or Freddie. Those just typically have they're the safest,
right?
Lowest rates and things. So,
but it is more in line with an agency loan, this in particular one, than any other type of loan, right? It's a big,
it's shorter term in the 5 years.
Yeah,
10 is kind of the longer terms. 5, 7, and 10 is typical commercial loans that are institutional, not necessarily bridge loans. Bridge loans are usually 1, 2, or 3 years, potentially with some options on the back end to keep it, extend the term of the loan. But this one didn't need the bridge, and it covered cash flow was good enough that it covered. You go bridge when you're adding that value, or when you can't, when it won't qualify for better financing. So you basically buy on a bridge loan and then fix whatever's wrong or increase the value and then refinance into one of the, an institutional long-term stuff.
Yeah. Now, if some of you are wondering what we're talking about and are a little bit lost on us just jumping into this loan conversation, that means that you didn't listen to the episode 2 weeks ago where we take a deep dive into the types of loans for commercial properties. So if you want to learn more about that, 2 episodes ago. Do you remember the reason why that Vieira decided to go on a 5-year rather than longer? Just because they got the terms they wanted in a 5 rather than a 7?
In value add, you kind of want to do as short a term as possible that still protects you and gives you options, because these almost every lender of this size will charge I think of it as an exit fee or a prepayment penalty. So if you pay it off early via a refinance, they will still charge you some of the interest they would have earned had you kept the, and there's different ways that they break it down, and it gets relatively complicated formulas and stuff you do, but the prepayment penalty always gets less and less as the closer you get to the end of the original loan term. So if we were to refinance in year 3 on a 10-year note, on a 10-year term, we might have gotten a lower initial interest rate. The longer the term, typically the lower the rate. But then we would have paid a huge, if we refinanced after we added the value in year 3 or 4, we're paying a huge prepayment penalty because there's 6 or 7 years left on the loan versus the 1 to 2 years left on the loan. if that makes sense. So that
Yeah. So
you
the
strike a balance.
calculation there, yeah,
Yeah,
is
you
between
strike a
the
balance.
rate
We
and
had
the payment. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So a lot of times it is very valuable to have the shorter term so that the refinance is cheaper and it sets a window of
Yep. Yep,
time. Okay.
exactly. And the goal at that refi would most likely be then you get the longest term with the lowest rate because you've already added the value. Now you're just trying to look what the lowest, best cash flow you can get going forward.
Okay. Now that is, I think that's all I have on the lender.
Okay.
I would, I was realizing in this investment summary that there wasn't a lot of breakdowns of cost or how the property was going to be run. If I were someone who wanted to see that, could I get a more detailed articulation and ledger
So,
of how
mhm.
much we're paying all these different people?
Yeah. So, I mean, we build budgets all the time, and we actually, whenever we're underwriting deals and as we're tweaking it to come up with all these numbers, projections, and stuff that we have, we have spreadsheet after spreadsheet that we'd be happy to share. A lot of times people don't know what they're looking at. So it's just like a bunch of crazy numbers on a screen. So it may or may not be always included in the investment summary, but it should be available that that there's no reason they wouldn't share it with you. In my case, whenever I literally just had an investor the other on another project ask me for, hey, do you have the income statement from the property? Just because he wanted to dig into it, and so I passed that on. It's it's it could be tedious, but it should be available whenever you ask for it.
Okay. Now, on that note, the way in which an inspection, so I can't help but as someone thinking about properties,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like property management and inspection, they are so closely tied together in that the inspection is going to, in part, be a referendum on the property management.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I
Could
mean,
be.
outside of like drastic things happening, of course, that like
Mm-hmm.
no, or things that they didn't know about.
Sure. Structural issues, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there's it would seem to me that if you found, if an inspection found significant things wrong, it could reflect poorly on the property management. So what is the situation for Vieira? What was the inspection like? What kinds of things were found? And how did that interact with the current property management? And how are we moving forward?
Yeah. So could talk about that specific thing for a long time. There's a lot there, but basically, so I view it as when you're underwriting and you're making offers and negotiating with the seller on the price of the property, you have a pretty good idea of the financial condition of the property. You have a pretty good idea of you've walked some units, uh, you understand what it generally is like. The inspection, I view the inspection as kind of a confirmation of what is this indeed what we were underwriting to, what basically what the seller represented to us. Is that correct? And then he's also, and your favorite term, he's also going to tell you about the bones of the property, the structure itself. I know you'd like that because what your property manager, your average property managers, depending on their experience level, they may not know. Might not walk and like see a crack along a foundation. Hey, is that something I should be worried about? Is that just natural settling cracking that happens, all day, every day?
Right.
That's what you're paying this inspector to find. He's going to go, hey, this is a soft spot in the floor. In a few years, we may need to redo, the I don't know, I'm making stuff up, but they're looking for things like that long term structural. Hey, we need to be aware that perhaps the stairs on these or the decks on these property, they need to be inspected every year to make sure that they're not getting rotten in this particular weak spot, or it's vulnerable to this, it's vulnerable to that. Really, you're just trying to you're correct, because that should feed how you're going to treat the property maintenance wise as you go forward. Hey, maybe we need to start budgeting for pool repair because the liner only has a year or two left on it, or whatever they're finding. These are things that the inspector, and then you really want to have your inspector and your property management team get into a room together and go over what they found, because your property manager is going to walk through the units too, and they're taking notes on slightly different things than the inspector is. But for instance, on the property inspection I've done most recently, the property inspector and my property manager went through every single unit, and they shared a piece of paper, and they were just calling out, checking boxes as they went through, just taking note of each unit and what, hey, this one's got that cabinet, or this one's got this, and then the ceiling leak here, evidence of whatever it is that they're looking at. So I guess backing up a little, so as a potential investor, you're you want to make sure that this process is going on. You're double checking the due diligence, as it were. So the sponsor team is doing all these inspections. They're getting loan quotes, and they're filling out all that paperwork. That's what they're doing in the background while all this is going on, before really it's even brought to the investors. You just want to verify that all this stuff is happening or has happened, as the potential investor.
Okay. What kinds of things, if I had that question, like, hey, what did the inspection find? Like, what's the kind of response to the major problems? What kind of things should I be looking for that, would indicate to me good, bad, or?
I would say you want to. Nothing is particularly good or bad. You just want to make sure that the sponsor is tracking whatever it is. Like, so you could just say, "Hey, what did you guys find at the inspection?" And they say, "Hey, honestly, the biggest thing we found was we got to install float switches in the attic air conditioners units because a lot of them are leaking, and there's evidence of it in the hallways." Okay, that what they'll they could find anything, but whatever then you would say, okay, and we're planning to address that with our maintenance plan going
Right.
forward. And they say, yeah, that was the biggest issue that we found. We're
Is
going to
it
do
in the
this, that, and the
budget?
other.
Should be a line item probably on the CapEx, maybe, or maybe not.
It could be anything. You just want to make sure that they're tracking it and they have a plan for it,
Right.
because
Do you
it
remember
could
what the
be
biggest
something
thing? Sorry. Do you
was
remember
for
the biggest thing was
Vieira.
found for Vieira?
We really didn't find anything big in Vieira. There's like some trees needed to be cut back from some of the buildings that they were getting a little close, like the
Yeah.
shrubbery. Some paint needed to happen. It was really really minor stuff. That it was it's a premier property, so there just wasn't there were small details in each unit that we've talked about. Like we talked about on the previous episode, but in terms of big gotchas, there wasn't anything. It was all just, hey, we're
Okay.
verifying that everything we think about this property is indeed true. There wasn't any.
What was
It was
what was this most significant thing for Heritage Cove? Just out of curiosity, was it the roofs? Because I know those are something that we're planning on fixing pretty early on in the investment, and that's just the townhomes, right?
Yeah, there was, as I recall, there were some septic issues, and we just wanted to make sure that they were flowing properly. And I think over time we fixed all those, but there were some
Okay.
septic issues that hey, look closer at these septic tanks in the duplex backyards. And then there was the roof for for Heritage Cove was something we knew was going to be. There were a few not active, but a few had been previously patched issues, so there was evidence of an aging roof. So we knew that it was going to be, we need to include new roofs in the business plan.
And again, if that's what they say the inspection found this, and that's approached in the business plan, that's a checkbox, right? That's doing the due.
Yeah,
the
you're
due
going to find
diligence.
something in every inspection, whether it's small, big, showstopper or not. So if you're continuing
Right.
with to buy if it was a showstopper, like, oh my gosh, this is located right over a sinkhole, or there's toxic waste buried underneath the property. Okay, we're not. Then they wouldn't even be bringing the opportunity to you.
One would hope, I guess, if they.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they're like, yeah, they're toxic waste, but
Yeah, exactly. I've seen Aaron Brockovich, so I don't think you want to do that. It's going to be very expensive down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the plan typically for property management? I mean, it sounds like in this instance, like if I were an investor for looking at I'd be like, okay, so you're keeping on the same property management team or moving out because it's vertically integrated? Like, what's the plan there? How are we maximizing efficiency of cost and action with property management?
Yeah, so with Vieira, Lake City, the capital partners that we discussed last time, or the sponsor partners that we talked about, they are vertically integrated, so they have their own in-house management that they install in all of their properties that they buy. So what that does is that really closes the loop between the asset manager, like sponsor, and the property manager, because they're the same. The incentives are aligned. It's easier to get the property manager to act with the long-term goal, the long-term, we're not just trying to pump up numbers in the short term. We're trying to maximize the value of the property over the long term. So whatever we got to do to get that, it aligns all those interests, and it's much more efficient that way. But it is a good question you should ask, like, hey, who's going to manage the property? Have you worked with the property manager before, or
Right.
are they big in the market? Do they know the market well? Like what these are questions you should absolutely ask. And if you're vertically integrated, hey, how are you guys at hiring? Because essentially what's going to happen is they're going to bring some of
they're going to have to hire some people. Yeah.
Yep. You're going to bring some, and you may keep maintenance men on, or a leasing agent or something, and bring them under your new umbrella. If they're great worker and knowledgeable about the property, there's no reason you can't, especially if you're putting them into your management system to where, you still have the same control you would have had. You just have less people to hire, which is always a win. But so basically, like, hey, what's your hiring practice? How hard is it for you guys to attract talent? That kind of thing. I've asked property managers that move, that do that a lot, just to see, hey, I'm curious how this goes. You guys struggle to find talent, or is it easy? Does turnover high, or whatever? So those are all things you could ask.
Yeah, and then what's their kind of policy, or of if they're taking over and there's extant employees, do you just kind of like take them on board until they cause a problem, or do you like interview them? You're like, what is I think that'd be a good thing to ask. Like, how are they just dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. And in Viera, I don't believe that. I think we took on one or two employees. Don't quote me on that. I can't remember, because I get a lot of stuff confused between properties. But I think they did. They definitely interviewed people in terms of, hey, come under our wing, that kind of stuff. But oftentimes that's just a reality of the business. Is sometimes you don't always hire the best, and then you end up needing to move on from them relatively short term. After it doesn't seem to be working out like you hoped. So it's a risk of the business, but that's always the case with property management.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if you saw a lot of just shoddily done maintenance, that would give you a pretty clear indication of a problem area. Or, when you walked in the office in the beginning to do your first, like, what is it? Fake shopping, or whatever they call it.
Secret shopping. Yeah.
Secret shopping.
Pretending that you're the tenant needing to be.
Yeah. And the leasing agent yells at you or something. I guess you could,
Yeah, exactly. If they're not friendly, and I've done that. I've recently been doing some secret shopping at in a market that we're buying in. But there was definitely, I walked into one, and she ended up being really friendly later on. But initially, it was just like, hello, okay, yeah, here, fill this out or do this, and it was like, okay, I guess I'm. I was like, no, hi, how are you? Welcome. None of this. It was pretty weird initially, but.
Sounds like maybe she just dealt with a few people.
Yeah, she was just like, that particular property, you had to, like, in order to even go see the units, you had to, like, fill out this thing and verify your identity and like take a picture of, like, it was weird. I was asking her, I was like, okay, treat me like I'm your grandpa. How do I? She was like, I think you got to turn off because you got to, like, allow the camera. And it was crazy. But anyway, once I got that done, verified my identity, it seemed like she was like, okay, I'm more willing to.
You're a person who's, like, serious rather than just
just a weirdo, bum off the street or something. So,
or someone who just has, like, this is not the place for you, type thing. Yeah,
sure.
All right, well, let's talk about the, like, most fun of things now. Like, it doesn't get any funner than insurance.
I'm gonna throw up.
So let's talk insurance. So this property is it's in the trees, but it's also near some water. So what are the risks to the property, and how did that affect the insurance?
Yeah, so coastal market insurance is kind of a different beast than if you were in the Midwest or something. There's risk to natural disasters, although there's tornadoes in the Midwest too, I suppose, but hailstorms and whatnot. But you have to be aware of the potential risk to the property, hurricanes and flooding and things like that. One, you should ask, like, hey, what all is covered by the insurance you guys, if you're talking to a sponsor, by the insurance you guys are planning on getting, and they'll talk about, hey, this covers loss of income, this covers total loss of property from named storm, from all other perils, from whatever, from fire, whatever it is. You should ask, and they should be able to answer, how are we, there's all kinds of different, insurance gets crazy complicated, but basically, hey, are we going for the cheapest insurance out there because we're not too worried about stuff, but we know we have to have it. And also the lender will have a lot of thoughts on the insurance that you got to carry. So
Sure.
often the insurance guy and the lending team are talking to each other a lot, passing requirements for the loan, making sure that we're not, because you could get quoted, hey, premium is going to be $1,500 a unit. And then you go, okay, cool. You underwrite to that and you start moving towards closing. And then the lender comes back and says, hey, we need XYZ coverage that wasn't included in that quote. Now you're like, the new quote is like, oh, we're at $2,500 per unit. And it's like, oh, that changes a lot of different stuff. So
Right.
asking what the coverages are and, hey, have we, and it's extremely complicated. So it's not like as an investor, you're not going to understand a lot of it as to why, but the questions you can ask are ones like, has the lender seen your insurance and are they approved? Have they approved your insurance? That kind of stuff. Because it's like, oh, well, let's make sure if they haven't thought of it or whatever. And I'm sure they have. If they're an experienced operator. But these are questions you can ask just to kind of poke and make sure that there's support for whatever it is in their business plan. Because frankly, you could study for years and try to learn insurance and how it's quoted and priced and what coverages are there and what coverages not, and look at 40-page document of the actual insurance policy or whatever. Chances are it's a lot longer than 40 pages actually, but and you just gouge your eyes out. You're not really going to understand it as a lay person, but you can ask questions to make sure that they're thinking of the big ticket items.
I would assume that hearing that it's got covering loss of income would be a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the ones that covering any of these kind of natural disasters or just serious stuff goes sideways scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be, I mean, that seems like a pretty important one for an investor, just in general. I mean, if you can't rent out a unit because it's
burned down or
demolished
flooded or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. And you could ask, hey, how many typical industry standards around 6 months or 6 to 8 months of lost income coverage? Because at that point you're either rebuilding, via the insurance check, or you're cashing out. If it's been, for whatever wipeout, it'll cover you long enough until the insurance is all resolved. Basically, you either made the repairs to remediated for water damage if a flood came in or something. Okay, 6 months, 8 months is probably more than enough time to get tenants back in the units and paying rent. So, those are the things you ask. And I would also say another good question to ask is, hey, let's say a hurricane comes and wipes us off the map. What now? What does that do?
Yeah. And I mean, a good answer would be, it's fully covered and we'll most likely just be
we'll pay our hurricane
out,
deductible. They'll hand us a check and it'll depend on, hey, is it completely wiped out? Or do we want to take our money? What valuation are they giving us? These are all the things that you would talk about. But basically, if you have full replacement cost coverage, it oftentimes they may give you more than what you pay. You know what I mean? It maybe you bought for 39, you go wiped out a year later, you might be getting 45 million. Obviously, you're going to pay a giant deductible to get that coverage, just like you would if something went horrible and health insurance or something. But once you get that deductible, then these are questions you would ask. So how does that process look like? Does it it's going to take time to, especially if hurricanes very rarely, only if they're wiping stuff off the map, they usually do a bunch of things. It's not usually just one house. Usually all the neighbors, and it's and so it takes some time to process all the insurance claims and things like that. So
sure,
that's a good question to ask.
It's not like tornadoes that can just like take one house in the middle of like a cul-de-sac and that's it.
Let's be honest. It's not a house. It's a trailer park. It's they're magnets for, somehow they always find the mobile homes.
Yeah, and then that one time they found Dorothy's house. Now
it was in Kansas.
I think it was. So I guess the last thing on the insurance side of things is, well, it's kind of just in thinking in that space, as you talked about valuations and all that. What about the taxes on the property? Is like tax valuation increases built into this? How are we?
That's a good question to ask.
Okay.
So basically, it depends on the state, but all states have different laws based on how they're going to, because your property taxes, in most states, if you sell your house and it's for significantly higher than the last time it sold, they'll reassess the value of the property based on that value. They have all sorts of different ways to measure values and what's the taxable value and all that. So it's important to understand that. But a lot of times, in like I said, in most states, they'll reassess at the sale. So you want to make sure that if that's a case in the state, that this property is being bought in, you should make sure that they've underwritten an increase in the, a commensurate increase in the property taxes for the new sale price, the new valuation of the property. So, because a lot of times you'll see inexperienced operators go, "Oh, here's the taxes last year," and I'm just throwing these numbers out here. Were $50,000, so I'm just going to underwrite $50,000 for year one. But if they sell the property for 30% higher than it sold last time, 5 years ago, well, now they're reassessing it, and that 50,000 maybe 62,000, and maybe who knows. That should be underwritten in the business plan. You should account for the increase of the value over the last time it sold, or maybe something happened that it's all vacant, run down, whatever. The value has gone down. Maybe it will go down, but it's something that the operator should underwrite, making sure that they're accounting for the potential increase in taxes. That taxes and insurance are your two biggest expense items, and so you should be comfortable or confident that the sponsor team has taken into account the two biggest items, taxes and insurance.
And I mean, this is not connected to the taxes we were just talking about because that's property tax, but this does lead me to one of my next questions. Actually, the next two, which is Loki's here for this. She's all about. She wants to know too. Yeah, she wants to know why. What I wasn't on. I was looking at the Vieira one and it wasn't on there, but I was looking as an investor. I was looking at another pitch deck, an investment summary, and there was this thing explaining depreciation and cost segregation analysis and how that is a good thing and it saves money. Can you just walk me through what I need to understand about that so that I can assess whether or not, I mean, I'm assuming that there are properties that don't do these. There are investments that don't do these. So is it, I guess, convince me that this is necessary for me to do it and go into investment, or is it necessary to have it to know that it's a good investment? I guess.
No, it's something any good operator will have a plan for a cost segregation study on the property, the year you acquire it. Basically, a cost segregation study takes every object on the property and breaks it down to, let's say the purchase price was for Vieira's $39 million. The cost segregation study breaks down every single item on that property, whether it's a drawer, a countertop, electrical wiring, whatever it is. They assign a value, a portion of that 39 million to each object on the property. And what that does is certain things allows you to depreciate them fully in the first year. It's called bonus accelerated, whatever you want to call it, depreciation. So basically the year you buy, you take a huge paper write-off. There's no actual money being lost, but you write off a huge loss, and that can offset future income or current income from another property for an investor. Yeah, there you go.
So what I have here is a generic example. I just want to put this up as a generic example of what Matthias is talking about as far as if you break up. Okay, now, Loki, that's a live mic. If you break up the different aspects of a building, and then you are able to deduct for those or depreciate those and deduct from the value because of that, you can see here, anybody who's looking, that on this example of $1 million, if you just depreciate prorated over time of the 27.5 years for the building, you'd only over 5 years you'd only be able to depreciate, I suppose, $145,000.
Yes.
But if you break it up into the constituent parts of a building, which can be anything from, we've talked about this before, ovens,
roofs,
improvements, roofs, objects that go into a building, and you break each of those up into the range in which they can be depreciated for however long they are allowed to be depreciated. Essentially, you do that divided by that amount of time. So if it's 5 years, you can depreciate 1/5 of that each year. The total for the same exact amount of money and building would be $390,000. So you're talking what is that? 170% ish increase.
Significant increase. And it's important to note that the total amount of depreciation isn't changing, right? You're still only allowed to depreciate whatever that building cost is,
Right.
but moving it forward means tax savings and tax today versus save, a dollar in your pocket today is always better than a dollar in your pocket 27 and a half years from now, right? So yes, you will pay taxes on stuff later. You won't be sheltered as much later, but you'll have, it the laws of compound interest tell you that you'd much rather have that dollar today than you would in 5 years
Right.
in
You can
terms
start
of
doing
tax
something with the money coming
savings. Yeah.
through. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, speaking of taxes, I've heard a number of times that a good market has landlord friendly policies or business friendly policies. What kinds of, if I were to do some research, what kind of things should I be looking for in a market? Like, what does that look like exactly? I mean, I think the main one would be something like how long it takes to get a non-paying tenant out. But what other ones are there?
Yeah, so in terms of business friendly, you're looking at low corporate tax rates, low income tax rates for businesses, things like that. If they're courting businesses to come in, offering tax incentives, that's typically what municipalities, the power they have to be business friendly or not. But for landlords, it's for landlord friendly states, it's definitely, hey, what kind of timelines can we expect for evictions? Is it 30 days legally, or is it 6 months legally? You can't. What kind of notification are you required to provide to tenants in order to non-renewal, all that stuff? And you're just looking at the timelines and how quickly you could get a non-paying tenant out, or what do they force me to provide to tenants and things like that. Some big cities have a lot of rent control, a lot of rules around what landlords can do, and avoiding those is a way to keep your risk low, really.
Okay. And well, that leads me to this is actually my final question. I thank you for all your patience, lead sponsor Matthias, and answer all my investing questions.
Sure.
Is this, I mean, I guess evictions and renovations to a property and all that needs to be done on the property, all that kind of ties into this question, which is a little bit away from the property, but one that I really wanted to get answered on the air, as it were, which is so there's kind of always it's called a J curve, I guess, in economic circles, but like, it's called an occupancy dip in the attempt to take a property from its value add position to maximizing its value. Like, how is it that you project what that dip's going to be like? What is the plan to deal with that dip? What's a reasonable consideration? Like, if a sponsor tells me, oh, it's going to dip 15%, should I be like, that's too much? Or how do I assess an occupancy dip situation?
15% is actually a pretty good estimate. What's going to impact it is how much you're doing on the interior of each unit if you're renovating units before you put new tenants in, and literally how long is that going to take? If you're just painting and you have a team of painters, that's 2 or 3 days a unit, right? To clean it, paint it, and get it ready to rent again. If you're doing significant, full kitchen rip gut jobs, okay, now we're talking 2.5 weeks or more per unit, depending on the team you've got and the size of the job. So those are things you want to take into account. The heavier the reno, the bigger dip you should expect, because at any given time, not only do you have, are you raising rents for people? So when you raise rents, it takes longer to fill them, especially if you're going right to the top. It's that much harder to qualify tenants with the new income requirements, blah, blah, blah. But you also have down units that are being renovated at any given time. So you're adding vacancy in. So 15% is usually good. You could usually beat that with an efficient team. But it really just depends on the business plan. But you should ask, like, hey, what kind of asking that question, what kind of vacancy or the Jake, what kind of occupancy dip are we expecting? How much are we, what's our peak vacancy going to be at? Yeah, and how long is that period? It's just the size of the property in general could dictate. Maybe it's 3 years where we are, ebbing and flowing. Maybe it's a year and a half. Who knows? Whatever it is. So these are questions to ask.
Right. I mean, it could be definitely fluid. Like, you could come back up at some point, and then people move out, you're trying to reno, and it goes back down, and then it comes back up. It's not going to be one smooth curve necessarily. I guess that is true. Well, so I mean, for Vieira, it never really dipped that much because it was nothing the renos were just not that.
Yeah, they're not. So, I mean,
massive.
they've done, we kind of paused the renovations right now because there was a dip. And I think it was more, I mean, not a significant dip, but it's below 90% occupancy. And a lot of that, I think, was there's a term that whenever you buy a property, you run the risk of inheriting some tenants that they just hurriedly threw in there to make it seem like it was fuller. You know, pump and dump is kind of what it's called. You pump up the numbers and then get rid of it before, because if you let people with, for instance, poor credit move in, or you lower your credit standards you'll get more people in. But over the long term, those people who have poor financial habits, the risk goes up that they will stop paying rent or not be able to pay rent. And so now you may have to evict a few more people if you lowered your standards. But in the selling property scenario, you're like, hey, I don't care. That's your problem, dude. As the sellers,
Right.
that always ends up happening a little bit. I won't say always. That happens a lot. And that's just kind of the cost of acquiring a property. You got to figure out, hey, who are some of these tenants that just moved in, and maybe they just pay late. Maybe they just need to be retrained, or maybe they are just bad tenants that you'll eventually have to get rid of. And that's just the business. It happens. So there was a little bit of that at Vieira. So there was a dip, and it'll be back above 90 in like a month. So these are just things that you should be cognizant of, but it's not
Right.
There's really no way to avoid it, I guess. There's nothing really that you could do, especially if you're raising rents, which we are at Vieira. Like, since we bought it, we're getting above what we thought we'd get initially in terms of rent. But by the nature of raising rents, again, the higher you go, the longer it takes to fill those especially above what was being charged.
Right. And then I think I would just to tag on to that as me, a good number to compare that to is if you ask about occupancy dips, you could also make sure to know, and if they haven't listed, then ask about break even occupancy, right? As a kind of margin.
Sure. Yeah. How low can we go before we go red in terms of operations? Yeah, that's a very good question.
And VR's like 60% or something. It
was like 60.
It's not that low. 67 or something.
67%, which is crazy low.
Yeah.
We could have a whole lot of real bad problems and still cash flow in Vieira. But that's part of having that low leverage. That's that margin that it's given you, is your break even occupancy requirements go lower and lower, and you just got that much more safety margin.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind, is that it's not the amount of money you make on that leverage is also dependent. I mean, like those numbers all go together, right? Leverage, occupancy, and net operating income and expenses, but all go together. That reminds me, for those of us, we probably should have clarified this earlier, and I don't think we did on the last one either, but like, leverage just means the amount, most people know this, but it means the amount you owe versus the amount that you've paid for. And debt to equity is another way to think about it. But like, Vieira's low, it's on like 63%, which means 63% of its loan, 37% of it is paid for with a down payment, which allows for that margin. Okay, well, I think that's all of my questions. I've checked through my checklist of lender, insurance, property management, and inspections. I think that's all I have for you, lead sponsor Matthias. So appreciate your time. Loki, any more questions for you? No, Loki's good as well. Excellent. She's satisfied. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Wrap this latest edition of the Get Invested podcast up. We appreciate you guys hanging out and listening to us. As always, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, want to get at us about anything related to any of this, please comment in the Substack, DM Matthias, DM me on LinkedIn. And then, of course, if you want to show your appreciation, restack, 5-star, thumbs up, heart, depending on your platform, all of those things are possible.
Share it with your buddies.
Share it. Yep. Repost it. I do know that if you repost it on your LinkedIn, which we would love, LinkedIn is probably going to hate you, but hey, sometimes sacrifices have to be made for those that you love. But anyways, we're going to get out of here. As always, we appreciate you hanging out with us on the Get Invested podcast.
Thanks.